You're a swimmer and you represented Kenya. How was that? Why didn't you want to pursue it? And how was that experience representing Kenya?
Do you know an 8-year-old who's swimming or a 10-year-old who's swimming? He got the national coach to come teach.
Ah,
Yeah, and actually they didn't even know I was Kenyan at the time. So at some point the coach came to me and was like, too bad you're not Kenyan, or you could be on our national team.
oh, they're that good.
And I was like, I'm Kenyan. And he was like, no, you're Singaporean. You don't know that you're Singaporean.
When you mentioned Chandaria here in Kenya, it's a name that's well respected, and it's a name that's primarily just signifies business.
In 2016, we celebrated our 100 years as a family moving to Kenya. And that kind of took us through to, they planned the event to show young people what our family's life used to be, what we accomplished in the years.
Good evening and welcome to the Late Night Business. My name is Ian Dennis, and as always, each and every week we have a very interesting show lined up, and today it's no different. But before I get to introduce my guest, I want to remind you that you're here at the Capital Club, the place you need to be as an entrepreneur, because at the Capital Club you have access to a wide array of amenities, including meeting rooms, there's actually the gym, there's the spa, there's the restaurant, there's so much you can actually be able to do as an entrepreneur. I also want to remind you that two of my books, one, Business Conquest and the other, Food for Thought, are actually out at the Textbook Center, so grab yourself a copy. The guest that I have with me tonight is a very interesting guest because he's actually part of a business that actually spanned across 4 generations. He's the only guest I've had who has been to 2 of the top universities in the world. That's Harvard and Stanford. She's an entrepreneur, she's a consultant, she's so many things, she wears many hats, and I'm looking forward to this particular conversation. The guest I'm talking about is Ayushi Chandaria. So welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Pleasure, welcome to the show. Nice to see you. The first conversation, or rather, the first question I like asking every particular guest I have on the show, what exactly are you most grateful for today?
I'm staying at my grandparents' place in Kenya. I'm just grateful to have them around. I feel like just waking up in the morning, getting to chat to them, getting to hear about their life advice is just amazing.
How is it? Because your grandparents, Manu Chandaria, who's been very instrumental in probably shaping Kenya's entrepreneurship landscape, and also just having a big impact in Kenya's economy. How is it being a granddaughter of such a successful parent in a successful generation? How exactly is it?
It's inspiring. I think everything he does makes us as grandchildren and children, I guess, my dad and aunt, want to do more as well with our time. He's also just so loving. He wants to meet our friends. He wants to be a part of our lives. He wants to speak to us on the phone every day, just like someone who really cares about us. And we know that we're not second when it comes to business or anything else. We know we're his top priority. And so that's really nice.
What kind of conversations you usually normally have?
Everything. Sometimes it's about the Chandaria Foundation. Sometimes it's about my school, my friends, my boyfriend. I talk to him about everything.
Everything?
Yeah. And my grandma too. Talk to her about everything, and she's actually amazing at advice.
Interesting. So you mentioned you're in Kenya for a short period of time, primarily because you're still working abroad and still doing all of that. So how often do you usually get to spend time with grandparents? How have you molded that relationship? Because I think most of us probably didn't have that particular privilege.
So when I was young, a lot, like 6-8 times a year, and it's because we would both travel, we'd meet in different countries. Now it's whenever we come to Kenya. So I've come to Kenya 3 times in the past year, and sometimes it's just to see my grandparents. I came for my grandfather's book launch in August. Sometimes it's for other things. For this design program, I hosted a trip of 30 students from Harvard Business School in May, so I came for that. So it just depends.
Interesting. So let me just, just to create context, you've had a very, very interesting, successful educational journey. You're probably in the middle of a very interesting career. Just take us back, growing up. What aspirations did you have?
So do you want me to share how I grew up?
Yeah. Just want to know about you.
So I grew up in Singapore, actually.
Oh, you didn't grow up in Kenya?
Grew up in
Singapore.
Singapore.
Born in Singapore?
But a Kenyan citizen.
All right, but you're born in Singapore?
Yes, born in Singapore, a Kenyan citizen. And I really did split time between the two growing up. When I was young, even though I was in school in Singapore, spent the whole summers, came here on Christmases, a lot of time here. And as I got older, I began swimming, and I actually competed on the Kenyan national team as a swimmer. So at that time, for those few years, I actually spent 4 to 6 months a year in Kenya. So my childhood was very split. I did go to school in Singapore though. And then at 18, I left Singapore. I went to the US for college. I went to Stanford, where I thought I wanted to do maths, but I ended up doing computer science and product design with a minor in psychology. And then I think, most American universities are like this. You get to explore different things you like.
Yeah.
You get to try things out. So I thought I wanted to do software engineering.
Yeah.
Interned in computer science,
Yeah.
realized that's not for me. And that's what took me down the path of more consulting, where I worked in New York at McKinsey.
Let me take you back because it's very interesting because when I came across, you're a swimmer and you represented Kenya. How was that? Why didn't you want to pursue it? And how was that experience representing Kenya on a global stage as a swimmer?
Yeah, I loved swimming. I used to swim for my school. I used to swim with my friends. Like, I actually really enjoyed the sport. And funny story, I actually was just swimming in Kenya with a coach that my grandfather had set up for me. But my grandfather likes top of the line. So do you know, an 8-year-old who's swimming or 10-year-old who's swimming, he got the national coach to come teach.
Ah.
Yeah, and actually they didn't even know I was Kenyan at the time. So at some point the coach came to me and was like, too bad you're not Kenyan, or you could be on our national team.
Oh, they're that good.
And I was like, I'm Kenyan. And he was like, no, you're Singaporean. You don't know that you're Singaporean. But yeah, I was Kenyan, and very soon after we went through all the paperwork, I got an invitation to swim on the team.
How was it? Because at 10, you're quite young, primarily you have this opportunity to be on this stage. How did you handle that particular situation?
I think when you're young, you don't actually think about the pressure as much. And I think swimming was fun for me. It was fun to beat people I didn't like. So it was actually the transition was very nice because I was so young when I started. I think as I grew older, I started breaking national records. I started swimming was a lot more serious for me. I think at that point I had to balance school, I had to do all these other things. But I also think it kept me connected to Kenya because, you have to go in Kenyan clothes, you listen to the national anthem. It did make me feel Kenyan, unlike a Kenyan passport only.
Yeah. And how are you balancing then? Because primarily you can try to imagine such a hard balance. So here you have swimming, I'm sure it's very, very demanding. You have school, and just by listening to you, seems very, very, you did very well in school. How are you balancing both? At that particular point in time, because you're here in Kenya, in Singapore, how are you balancing?
So I think I generally have this belief, the more things you put into your life, into your time expands to fit it in. So if you have more to do, you will be able to do that in the same time. If you have less to do, you will still take up the whole time, but do less. So
was that the mindset at 10, or you're just looking at it in retrospect?
Yeah, I think so. Looking at it now, but even then, I'm not very good at sitting still, and I also I was able to get it done because I had less time. If I had to swim, the homework had an hour. The homework would get done in an hour. If I had 6 hours to go home and do homework, it would take the 6 hours. And I see that in college. I see that in my work life now.
And from that particular experience, because you represented Kenya, why didn't you want to pursue it further?
So I went to Stanford for undergrad. And just being mindful, Stanford is... the Stanford team has US Olympians. So in my class, there was a girl called Katie Ledecky who just come back from Rio, I think, with 4 gold medals.
Wow.
So
your classmate was a 4-time Olympic gold medalist.
Compared to that, I'm 5'4". I wasn't going to be on their A team. I wasn't good enough. And I wanted to actually experience college for what it was giving me. I don't think I would have been an Olympic. Medalist. I don't think that was going to be a career for me. So.
And what made you switch? So it was that realization that you couldn't compete anymore because you...
I could. I think it was more that it's not a career for me. I would never become... I don't think I would become an Olympic gold medalist. I would never be able to reach that stage just by being a small body type person. So it was, do I want to spend my time swimming and be able to get to a good level but not reach that level? Or do I want to spend my time doing something else, pursuing other interests?
Interesting. And how was it growing up in Singapore? Because primarily here in Kenya, we always use Singapore as an example of a country we should have been, and primarily because things actually worked and the leadership there actually works. How is it growing up in Singapore?
It was great. It's safe, it's convenient, it's easy to raise kids, it's easy for kids to have friends, go out with their friends, there's not really safety concerns. I really liked it. It is Disneyland, and things are very, very easy. You don't realize the rest of the world. You don't realize, people steal stuff. If you leave your phone on the table, it'll go. But outside of that, it was great. I would want to raise my kids there one day.
And what was it called? So your parents also grew up in Singapore?
My dad grew up in Kenya. My mom grew up in India. So.
All right, interesting. Just take me through, because you have a very, very interesting and family history. Because now I think part of is it 4th generation, right?
Yeah.
Just take me through, your family tree. How exactly has it been? Because when you mentioned Chandaria here in Kenya, it's a name that's well respected, and it's a name that primarily just signifies business. Just take me through that particular history of the Chandarias.
Yeah, so I can start with everything I know. I was not alive for majority of this.
I know.
So,
it spans more than
yeah.
a century.
Yeah, it spans more than like 3 times my life before I started.
Yeah.
So I know that in 2016, it was meant to be in 2015, but in 2016 we celebrated our 100 years as a family moving to Kenya. And that kind of took us through to, they planned the event to show young people what our family's life used to be, what we accomplished in the years. And so I know that my great-grandparents moved to Kenya 100 years ago. And my grandfather and his brothers really started this big empire today. They, started investing in companies, started slowly building up from the ground zero. And one of the things is our family has a big focus on education. So my grandfather, all his brothers went abroad for school. They went to America and
so
came back.
What's it called? Your grandparents' brothers went abroad, or the children?
Grandfather and grandfather's brothers.
They all went abroad?
Yeah, they all went abroad for school. And I think the idea was that this education is going to be what brings our family up. And I think that's gone down our whole family lineage. My dad also went to Stanford. My cousin went to Columbia. My sister was at Stanford with me as well.
Interesting. And what brought them to Kenya? Because I think at that particular point in time, one thing you realized, most of the Indians who came to Kenya primarily, from the stories of the friends I know they came through, They came through the sea.
A boat.
I'm
pretty sure they came,
yeah. Story. I'm just coming with this, and that back then I think there were no cruise ships and all that stuff.
Long, not very nice journey.
Because I hear it was a rough journey.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. I heard it was a rough journey, and I heard that life was not so easy when you started. They came to Kenya for better opportunity, and then they started small. They started, I think, with a shop. They started making money. They kept growing and growing, and today they're what they are.
And what are the dynamics? Because you mentioned that it was your grandparents, Mani, who came here. Did he come together with the brothers, or did he come first and the brothers joined? What are the dynamics at that particular point in time?
So this is way before I was alive.
I'm sure you've had the stories. I'm sure. I'm just putting you on the spot.
I'm pretty sure they all came together. And they were all in and out. They had family in India, so they still went back to India. They all went abroad to study. So there was in and out, but they were all working on it together.
What was the first business they started at?
A shop in Kenya. It was a shop where, I know this story, heard this story from my grandparents, a shop where worked in a shop, and they would sleep in the shop at night, wake up and start running the shop. And that's all they had. And then they grew from there.
How was that particular growth? Because I'm always very curious in terms of how do you start from the shop to establishing probably just this big empire. How was that from what you know? Because I'm sure he tells you a lot of stories. How was that particular process like?
So from what I know, so don't quote me on it.
But, no, we're just having a conversation.
But they started slowly, they got a community. There's a pretty strong Indian-Kenyan community here, Gujarati Indian, Kenyan. They had a community, they started making friends, they all really supported each other. And at some point, they, with another family, co-invested in a business. And that business ended up doing really well. I think it was in Mombasa, I could be wrong. And they co-invested in this business, and it did well. And then with that money, they invested in more. They slowly bought out their partners, and slowly they started it was very organic growth. It's not like today's Silicon Valley, where you can become a unicorn overnight. Overnight. It was slow, but it kept going. They brought in new family members. People had children. They got educated and worked in the business, and it grew.
And what was the family, situation then? Because it was now your grandparents and primarily the brothers. I think 2 of them.
Yeah.
What are the dynamics in terms of now building the business? What was everybody's role towards it?
I think they worked together. I think everyone did what they needed to do. They all studied different things. So my grandfather did engineering.
He's an engineer.
Yeah, he's an engineer from University of Oklahoma. His brother went to Berkeley and did food science, I think. So they all had different expertise, and they all put it together where they needed to.
And all this particular expertise were all put into the same business, or did they start different particular businesses at the same time? How was it, this particular dynamic in terms of...
It was one business, and then they slowly grew.
All right. And then over the years, because as the decades move around, primarily they started getting kids. How are they, let's say now your parents, how are they being now inducted into the business over the period of time?
Yeah, so my dad is working in the Singapore office along with a few of my uncles. And they've changed. They don't do exactly what they do in Kenya. They do some manufacturing, some technology stuff. They have businesses in China. They have businesses in Malaysia. They have businesses in Vietnam. So they kind of just work on the Asia businesses. And we have people all around the world. We have people in family offices in Geneva, in London, in Toronto, and in Singapore.
And how's this particular dynamic? So primarily, granddad started in Mombasa, primarily eventually moved to Nairobi. Was it called? Got the kids. Was it called? Was it intentional that the kids went to study abroad so that they can set up business abroad? Why exactly was it why Singapore?
I think they just wanted an office in Asia, and the options that spoke English, that were good for business, Singapore, Hong Kong, there were a few options, and they decided Singapore was the best.
And so it was dad now who went to Singapore to set it up, or granddad also assisted through the process?
Actually, dad's uncle who went to Singapore to set it up. And then my dad followed.
And what is that? Because primarily you mentioned like the business in Singapore primarily is in different interests as compared to what exactly is in Kenya. Because in Kenya it's primarily manufacturing that you know of. What are the businesses that were set up in Singapore? Why were they set up at that particular point in time?
So I think the way the company works has changed. They also invest in things that the companies they like. So it's not as manufacturing heavy. They also invest in China. They invest in different countries in Southeast Asia. So it depends on what the opportunity is in the different markets.
So what are the interests as of now?
I know that there's we have a company in a manufacturing company in China. We have a company in technology in Singapore. I know that we've invested previously into some retail, into some other things too.
Interesting. And having witnessed all this, have you, joined the family business, or are you just still watching it from outside?
Just watching it from outside. So I'm actually, working in New York, a completely outside consulting company.
How come? Is it just your personal choice, or is it because it's part of the company culture, you have to work outside before you come in?
So I actually I wanted to work in a consulting company. I want to get experience. I think that we will have to find our own paths in life and figure out what works for us. And I think that we just have to explore different things. So I actually want to work at several companies.
All right. And so you went to Stanford, meaning that you performed quite well in your A-levels and got to Stanford. How was the experience being in Stanford? Because we all know Stanford as the A-list university that you know. How exactly was that experience for you?
Yeah, so my dad went to Stanford, so I knew I wanted to go there since I was young, and I loved it. I think that I'd been in Singapore before that. I thought I was good at everything I did in school. It's the first time I came into an environment where I did have to challenge myself. I thought I was amazing at maths. I realized that there were people better than me at maths.
The people taller, the people were better swimmers, and still better academic.
So I think I think I learned a lot. I think I also grew. I was able to create my own path at Stanford, which is important for everyone to learn how to create what's the best for them. Talking about jobs, joining the family, working outside. I think everyone has to create what's best for them eventually, and I think that Stanford taught me. You could do multiple majors, you could minor, you could omit classes, you could petition to do something else. There's a lot of flexibility, and I think that allowed me to create my own path. And advisors were very helpful. They really wanted to support you to do what was best for you.
And I know the environment in Stanford is quite competitive because it's made of the best and the best. How did you manage to literally maneuver you around, find your way around to still maintain that particular bright star that was actually in Singapore that moved now to Stanford?
So it doesn't feel super competitive. I think people...
just a perception you have.
Yeah, I think people understand. I think, just in business, this conversation is about, I think people understand if you're lifting other people up, you're doing better for yourself too. And I don't think people are competitive. Stanford, everyone was very helpful. Everyone wanted everyone to do well as far as I knew. My friends were all, extremely helpful, wanted me to do well, were happy for me, and vice versa.
And in terms, because you mentioned that primarily you went into computer science. Was it, because you mentioned you're good at math primarily, why did you choose that particular path? Was it because you're good at math, or is it something that you wanted to be part of, this particular new, era of computers and all that?
So not at all. I said maths because it was my favorite subject in school. It wasn't very well
Everybody
thought
around
out.
here is just grinning because everyone around here are not good in maths.
Yeah, so my
they can count money, but
favorite subject in school. Went to Stanford, realized I didn't want to do maths necessarily, and there was a push of just being at Stanford in Silicon Valley. All my friends wanted to do computer science, that maybe that's what I should do. And so that's kind of where computer science came in. And I think there was a part of it was just the people around me wanted to do this, wanted to go and work for a Google, a Microsoft, all these companies. So I did do computer science initially because of just being at Stanford. And then I pivoted slightly into more design stuff as well and realized the combination of design, computer science, tech, all of that was probably what worked for me the best.
And so in computer science, there's so many things to specialize in. Data, there's so many things, programming. What did you end up specializing in?
So human-computer design.
What's that?
I think it's it's not AI, it's not what's going on with all the computer science you see today, but it's more what you interact with, like the actual screens you interact with, how they look, how they function, how humans like interact with this. And same with product design, it's how you interact with the product. So they're pretty similar actually. One is how you interact with the screen, the second is how you interact with the product. Yeah.
Interesting. And in pursuit of that, what are some of the possibilities that would have come out of that particular career? Because eventually you ended up pivoting again.
I think I realized that I wanted to be in an environment with a team setting. I wanted to work with people, and still like not knowing fully what I wanted to do. Consulting really lets you try different things out. Like I've been on projects where there is an aspect of like, designing a product. I've been on projects which is completely about healthcare. I've been on marketing projects. I've been on almost everything, and I think consulting gives you that. It gives you a ground to like try everything out to figure out what you like. And you work with the team. So you're actually learning from people, especially at the level I was an analyst, learning from people who knew a lot more than me.
Interesting. And before you come to the end of the first part of this particular show, only just because one thing I'm getting from you is that you're always in this particular pursuit of just trying to find yourself, trying to figure yourself out, and trying to experiment a lot of things before you end up to find out your exact path. In this particular pursuit, what are some of the lessons maybe you can share to the audience? The importance of just trying to find yourself.
Yeah, I think one is to try lots of things. Even at Harvard Business School, when I was in, I realized it wasn't necessarily all academic. I was like traveling a lot, I was meeting different types of people. I think it's just to like broaden your horizons as far as you can go, because that way you actually figure out for yourself what works for you and what doesn't. And then the second part of it, I probably need to get better at this too for myself, is actually if you're doing all these things, spending the time to reflect on them and figure out if they work for you, why they work for you, why they don't. And there's been times in my life where I've journaled, I've done all of these things too, to try and understand why I want to do something, why not, and how it works out.
You still journal to date?
I don't actually, and I want to start, but again,
I've also tried it before. It's very difficult to be consistent.
Yeah, journaling is difficult for me too. But like sometimes I like these workbooks, like at end of the year, like something to make goals. I fill in like these sheets. What is the best things of the last year? Like forced reflection. And I think when you are doing a lot, when you're always busy, when you're like, trying out lots of different things, it is good to look back and reflect, because otherwise you actually don't know. You're doing all this, you don't know what works for you and what doesn't.
Interesting. So in that particular part, you're going to come to the end of this particular part of the show. In the next part, you're going to be exploring design thinking, creative thinking, what exactly comes out of it. So make sure you actually stick out onto the show and just watch out for next week as we come to this particular conversation. My name is Ian Dennis. This has been the Late Night Business. Until next time, see you right here on KTN Home.